This James Degale, Chris Eubank Jr. fight has the experts divided. And I do mean experts. I'm not just talking about the regular fans. Experts like George Groves. George Groves has fought both Degale and Eubank in professional bouts. He fought James Degale in the amateurs. He sparred James Degale countless times when they were both amateurs at Dale Youth. He also sparred Chris Eubank Jr. countless times. So who better to make an assessment and prediction on this fight than George Groves? And interestingly enough, George Groves is leaning towards Chris Eubank Jr. winning this. Shane McGuigan, George Groves' now former trainer, is also leaning towards Chris Eubank Jr. in this fight. And it might surprise some to learn that Shane McGuigan actually speaks quite highly of Chris Eubank Jr. because he was ridiculed for his performance. I'm talking about Eubank Jr. now against George Groves. But one person who hasn't been ridiculing him is Shane McGuigan. He actually is very complimentary of him. He thinks that Eubank Jr. will probably win based upon the fact that although James Degale is a very skilled boxer and he has the slickness and the long range ability to outbox somebody like a Eubank Jr., he doesn't have the punching power, in Shane McGuigan's opinion, to keep him off the way that George Groves was able to keep him honest. He doesn't have that kind of punching power to get his respect. And so therefore he believes Eubank Jr. will get close and he will be able to swarm James Degale a lot more effectively than he was able to do against George Groves, because Groves hits a hell of a lot harder than James Degale. Degale won't be able to get that kind of respect. This is the opinion of Shane McGuigan. Now, it has to be said that both Groves and McGuigan are caveating that prediction by saying this is based upon their suspicion that James Degale is no longer the force he once was. If it was the James Degale of a few years ago, these two and pretty much all the other experts will be picking James Degale to win. But the general consensus is that James Degale is on the slide. And this is a consensus not just among insiders, boxers, trainers, and experts, but the general boxing public seems to feel this way as well, for the most part, that if it was prime James Degale, he outboxes Eubank and wins fairly comfortably. But the James Degale of the past few years, who struggled with Truax, James Degale post Badu Jack, and a lot of people feel like the Badu Jack fight took a lot out of James Degale. The general consensus is that this is a Degale on the slide, and Eubank may have got him at the right time. And in terms of Eubank failing at the highest level on two previous occasions against Groves and Billy Joe Saunders, for me, it was partly a case of Eubank Jr. freezing. Yes, it was. I know some people dispute this, but I firmly believe, I've been around boxing a long time. I boxed myself. I've helped youngsters over the years in boxing gyms, witnessed many different amateur shows. I know what I'm looking at when it comes to somebody freezing. Eubank Jr. froze both times. And I'm not saying that if he didn't freeze, he would have won. I'm just saying that if he didn't freeze, he would have started earlier. We would have seen a more persistent attack from earlier on in both fights if he hadn't frozen. And therefore, he might have made it a bit more interesting. He does lack front foot skills. There's no question about it. When somebody comes at Eubank Jr., like an Avni Yildirim or an Arthur Abraham, with the squared up shoulders, the high held guard, he's able to tee off. He has a natural aptitude for being able to deal with fighters who have that particular style. Nick Blackwell, Spike O'Sullivan, these guys are all very similar stylistically. Eubank Jr. is able to get the uppercuts off and the fast combinations against that kind of style. but against somebody who stands more side on, with a wider stance, who's a bit slicker, who shows him a jab and movement, particularly if they have punching power like a George Groves and they're good with a punching power at long range. That gives Chris Eubank Jr. a hell of a lot of problems. But be that as it may, have a look at the Groves fight. Have a look at the Saunders fight. In both fights, he didn't get going until later on in the fight. Why is that? Partly maybe because both guys slowed down. But look at what he wasn't doing in the first half of the fight compared to what he was doing in the second half of the fight. It wasn't just to do with them slowing down. It was to do with him finally snapping out of the trance that he was in early on. And to be honest with you, with George Groves, maybe his power dissipated a little later on in the fight. And that's why he started attacking a bit more when he wasn't feeling as much weight behind Groves' shots. But even during the ring walk for the Groves fight, I saw fear in Chris Eubank Jr. He doesn't have the innate confidence that his dad had. And this is why his dad's been talking about if Chris Jr. shows up, he should beat James Degale. He didn't show up against Billy Joe and George Groves. And another indicator that he froze was that his technique went totally out the window when it came to fighting on the inside, because there were moments when he had Billy Joe up close and also George Groves. Where were the short little punches that he normally throws? They were gone. He was throwing wild swings. And this is another classic sign. This is another classic pattern that you see in fighters who freeze. Their technique goes out the window when they start throwing punches. They're all over the place. So he froze those first two times, as well as the fact that he struggles with long-range boxers and a whole heap of other factors. Freezing was a very, very big part of what happened in those two fights. And again, I'm saying categorically, I am not suggesting that if he didn't freeze, he would have won those fights. It's not what I'm suggesting. Because if he was as sloppy early in the fight against George Groves as he was late, he might have got himself knocked out. He might not have gone the distance. If he was as sloppy early in the fight against Billy Joe as he was late, he might have got picked apart and lost by a much wider margin, because the more aggressive he is, the more opportunities he's going to give to his opponent. So that is understood. But be that as it may, I'm completely convinced that he froze those first two times. Will it be third time lucky during this latest step up? Will he finally actually show up? Will he be able to control his nerves? Will he be able to deliver in the ring and not just pre-fight talk when it comes to being confident? A lot of people talk a good game. When they get in the ring, they're not really as confident as they make out. We'll see whether Eubank Jr. can make it third time lucky this time around, whether he can break his duck, so to speak. Shane McGuigan believes he can. George Groves believes he can. Interestingly, and this really is interesting, Dennis Douglin, who was Chris Eubank Jr.'s main sparring partner for this camp, is actually picking James Degale to win. Now, he's very respectful of George. He's very respectful of Chris Eubank Jr., in this interview. He thanks him for letting him stay at his house and paying him well. And, it was good work. And he credits Chris Eubank Jr. for having a great work rate and being disciplined and dedicated. But he doesn't rate Chris Eubank Jr.'s boxing skills. He said in their sparring sessions, he showed Chris Eubank Jr. certain tricks. I mean, I'm not teaching him. I'm talking about when they were sparring, he was doing certain things. Dennis Douglin was, and he said Eubank Jr. found it very difficult to cope with the little veteran tricks that Douglin was coming up with. And he just feels like James Degale is a vet. He's been there and done that. And he'll have enough slickness and enough tricks in his box to take care of Chris Eubank Jr. That is Chris Eubank Jr.'s own chief sparring partner picking James Degale to beat him. Very interesting. Then we've got Dave Coldwell. Now, Dave Coldwell, to my knowledge, has very limited interactions with Chris Eubank Jr. and George Groves over the years. I don't think he's ever trained either of them. I could be wrong. I suspect that he did maybe spend a little bit of time around George Groves because Dave Coldwell did used to work for David Hay. And so David Hay, George Groves, Adam Booth, they were all very close. So maybe Dave Coldwell at the time was also close to George Groves. I don't know. But he is basically echoing the sentiments of most of the boxing public and I guess myself in saying that if a prime James Degale turns up, he outboxes Eubank Jr. relatively comfortably, but he's not sure either because he believes that James Degale may be on the decline. I've looked at the training footage for James Degale and Chris Eubank Jr. James Degale certainly appears to be in very good condition. Aesthetically, James Degale never used to look physically that impressive. You know, he was never a guy with rippling muscles. He never looked that strong, James Degale. At this stage of his career, aesthetically, he looks in the best shape he's ever been in. But that could just be cosmetic. I mean, we saw David Hay, for example, look in great aesthetic condition in the 2 Tony Bellew fights, but it was just aesthetic. It was just window dressing. There was no real substance there. His body could not perform. Despite how impressive it looked, he could not perform the way that he used to perform in the boxing ring. Will that be the same for James Degale? Is it all aesthetics and no substance when it comes to the way he's looking physically? I can't call it, people. I really can't call it because I want to pick James Degale. I really do. And I think when this fight was first announced, I was picking James Degale because I just feel he is the better boxer. Chris Eubank Jr. has choked the last 2 times he stepped up. He does struggle with good long-range boxers. So I feel like James Degale is the logical choice to go with. But I can't ignore somebody like a George Groves, who knows both fighters so well in and out of the ring. I can't ignore his trainer. Or ex-trainer now, Shane McGuigan. But at the same time, I can't ignore Dennis Douglas. You know, so I'm not just going off secondhand opinions, but I do have to respect the opinions of these individuals, particularly Douglas and George Groves, because they have inside knowledge. They've been in the ring. Douglas just done a whole camp with Eubank Jr. and he's picking the other guy to win. George Groves has fought both guys, sparred both guys countless times, fought James Degale in the amateurs, came up with him at Dale Youth in West London, and he's picking Eubank Jr. So I can't throw opinions like that out the window because these are people who do know what they're talking about. I'm sure there are going to be a bunch of people in the comment section saying Groves don't know what he's talking about. Douglas don't know what he's talking about. Well, that's funny. What makes you more qualified than these guys? Huh? What makes you more qualified to make a prediction than George Groves or Dennis Douglas? Please enlighten me. The reality is this is a difficult fight to pick. It has the experts divided. It has the general boxing public divided. And with good reason. Who is the favorite in this fight? Is James Degale a marginal favorite? I suspect he might be. I've spoken before about how Chris Eubank Jr., at least up until this point in his career, has never been an effective pressure fighter. Chris Eubank Jr. is very good on the back foot. That comes to him naturally. He's like a duck to water when he's on the back foot and he has pressure fighters coming at him. But when he has to go looking for an opponent, a slickster, somebody who's good at long range, he really struggles. He isn't good at cutting off the ring. He isn't good at applying pressure and maintaining his shape while doing so. He's not good at that. Never has been good at that. So when people say Eubank Jr. definitely wins because Truax beat Degale, although I think Eubank Jr. would beat Truax, Truax has a much more effective pressure fighter construct than Eubank Jr. does. Yes, he does. Truax doesn't come in throwing wild swings. Truax cuts the ring off better than Eubank Jr. Truax keeps his shape better coming forward than Eubank Jr. He's not always falling off balance and giving the opponent opportunities. Truax sticks to his jab a lot more on the front foot. So Truax's construct as a front foot fighter is much stronger than Eubank Jr.'s construct. Eubank Jr. is all over the place when he's trying to come forward. His feet are all over the place. He's falling off balance when he throws shots. It's just very, very messy, very sloppy. So I don't look at the Truax fights and say, okay, Eubank Jr. can definitely replicate that. You know? I think it will have to be a case of James Degale deteriorating. And I don't dismiss, by the way, the punching power argument that George Groves made. And the same for Shane McGuigan, where they said, look, James Degale doesn't have the punching power of Groves, so Eubank is just going to swarm him because he doesn't have anything there deterring him. And I definitely hear that. I do expect this to be a competitive fight. Something tells me that Eubank Jr. won't freeze this time. Something tells me that he won't, and that we will see a competitive fight. This might even go down to a split decision, maybe even a controversial decision. That's what I'm thinking in my head at the moment. James Degale, I think, will have periods where he's just outboxing Eubank. But I think Degale's lack of punching power, and it's not like he hasn't got any power at all. He does have some power, but he's certainly not on the level of the Groves when it comes to punching power. And I think at some stage, Eubank will managed to pin Degale on the ropes. We know Degale had a problem for a long time in his career with getting pinned on the ropes. Although in the Truax rematch, he managed to stay off the ropes successfully, right? And that was his last fight. He did make adjustments in that Truax rematch and made sure that he was not pinned on the ropes at any time in that fight. Maybe he'll be able to implement that this time around. But I do suspect that at some stage, Eubank Jr.'s will impose itself on James Degale. Degale, I think, will switch off at some stage, and Eubank Jr. will be able to get punches of some description off. And we know Eubank Jr.'s got an excellent engine, and down the stretch, I think we might see some dramatic moments in the fight. But in terms of a winner, again, if I had to pick, I would say James Degale on points. But I don't have to pick. So I don't know. I'm going to sit on the fence for this one because, you know, me picking James Degale is predicated on the idea that Degale is still somewhere near championship level, you know, his old type of form. He's somewhere near that because he's at a great camp. He looks in great shape. He looks sharp in the training. So if I had to pick, I'd say Degale based on my maybe misplaced belief that Degale is still somewhere maybe 80% as good as he was. But if he's really on the slide and it turns out that the Truax fights and the Badu Jack fight basically finished him, then we could see Chris Eubank Jr. taking it on a decision. I know some people are picking Eubank Jr. by stoppage, and I think that's mainly based on what they saw in the first Truax fight, where Truax had James Degale on the ropes and in the corner, and he was teeing off, and he was looking bad for James Degale, and people were thinking, you know what? If Eubank Jr. had him in that same position, the fight would have been over. But look at the adjustment he made for the rematch. Truax never got him in that same position in the rematch. So, yeah. You guys let me know what you think in the comment section below. Wouldn't surprise me if either guy won this fight on form and on, well, let me not say form, but on resume, James Degale's the obvious pick. And even on style, James Degale's the obvious pick. But I guess you could say on freshness, maybe it's more logical to pick Eubank Jr. You guys let me know what you think in the comment section below. It's happening, I'm out. Join me on Patreon. I upload a minimum of 2 podcasts every single week, covering a wide variety of controversial topics, as well as live stream Q&A sessions. Take a look on screen right now at some of the podcasts I've produced so far. For just $3 a month, the equivalent of about £2 a month, you get access to all my new podcasts and my entire back catalogue of past podcasts, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen on your computer or on your smartphone or tablet by downloading the Patreon app from the Google Play Store or the App Store for free. The Patreon app also allows you to download each podcast in MP3. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you get access to dozens of hours of exclusive content. It's easy to sign up, there's no contract, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.